Oh, that wasn't recorded or anything. Okay, all right, so, we have public attending, so I just wasn't sure if people had heard, the room is muted. I made an announcement, that we lost, Gus Horvath earlier this month on January 2nd, who's a former first selectman. So we just acknowledged a moment of silence in the room. So more information, we'll send out an announcement formally tomorrow, but obviously our thoughts and prayers are with his family, and he was a great asset to the town and did a lot for the community. So just want to acknowledge that. With that, then, I guess I would like to then call the order, the Board of Selectmen, special agenda Board of Selectmen meeting for January 7th. All rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Great, thank you. So we just have one topic tonight, and that's a discussion of the possible next steps for the Academy Community Center project. And as part of this conversation, we did invite our town attorney, Carrie Olson. Is she attended? Maybe we can bring her up on screen, as well as our bond counsel, Matt Ritter. And I know the board members had a number of questions about process options that the town would have now that we've gotten this feedback on the bids. And so they're going to be part of the conversation with the board. I do want to just make the public aware tonight is just us having a discussion about options. We're not making decisions tonight. It's not a question and answer session. There's an opportunity for you to provide comment to us if you'd like. I also encourage you to submit things in writing to the town. And if you have specific questions, my recommendation is submit them also to the BOS at madisonc.org email address. And we will try to answer everybody's questions and post them on the website. So we will get questions answered. It's just not going to happen tonight. Tonight is really for the board to ask questions of our advisors. This is not going to be a deep dive into the project either. I know the Academy Committee has been working on that. They will be coming back to that about specifics on the project. This is more high level about process and options. So with that, we do have some materials that I wanted to kind of walk through. Jeannie, if you want to share and also welcome our advisors.
Good evening.
Okay, yeah, and Carrie is on. Is Matt behind us?
He's there.
Okay. Yeah, the screen in the room, we can't see that, so it's a little strange. So, we'll kind of work forward, and then we'll take the screen share off once we have a discussion. So just highlighting again what the purpose of today's discussion is. In December, we had a special meeting where we heard back from the results of the bids that were received in December for the Academy project. And unfortunately got some difficult news, and that was that the project budget for the construction part of the project had increased by an estimated $5.2 to $7.6 million. That was obviously quite a surprise to us and not where we were hoping to be. But we do want to highlight that the town has been very fortunate in terms of receiving, if you want to move on to the next slide, Jeannie, that's what I'm talking to. The good news is that the town's been very successful at receiving grant awards. We received a $4 million grant from the state of Connecticut and a $3.625 million grant for the federal government to help offset this project cost. And so the way the bonding resolution was written, when this was voted on by voters in 2022, any grant received had to go against the bonding. So if we approved 16 million in bonding and we got a $4 million grant, we then meant we could only spend that 16 million still. So one of the ideas that we're going to be talking about tonight is trying to get public approval to take the grant money and apply it to the spending of the project rather than netting it off the bonding. And that's one option that we'll be exploring tonight. And so that's part of what this discussion is. Because we have that grant money, it helps us a lot. So it means the taxpayer is not going to be paying more in terms of the spending on the project. It will be still, the bonding amount would be adjusted, and we would be applying the grant money to the project budget overage. So with that, go on to the next slide. I just want to remind people of what this is about. And I know this was several years ago now, unfortunately, that we voted on this. But there was a purpose behind this that was driven by a lot of hard work by a lot of people over a number of years. Why do we want a community center? And this was presented back in January of 2022 as part of several public information sessions. There's a whole presentation that highlights this. But one of the goals of that was to preserve a treasured landmark that is in the center of our downtown. And so these are all things that the public felt were strong reasons to have this community center. And that's why people advocated for it. And this is why people voted for it. So this is just highlighting what the project purpose was. And this is part of a presentation that was given twice in 2022, right prior to the referendum. So I won't read it now, but if people are willing to, you can read it anytime at your leisure, but these are some of the main reasons.
We'll post it too. Right? So
Yeah, this will all be posted.
It's still on YouTube.
The presentation itself could be, yeah, that is, as well as the PDF document that was presented. It's like a 20-page slide presentation. There's also an explanatory text that was available that explains what the referendum is all about, that explains the project. So everything is there in terms of what was voted on back in 2022, all the facts. Next slide is just a quick highlight of the project background too, because we have some people who are new to town, some people don't understand kind of the lengthy history of this project. But I just want to highlight again that the building was closed in 2004. It sat vacant for a long time. The Board of Education was indecisive about what to do with it. Did they want to reopen the school? Did they need the space? And so finally they did turn it over to the town in 2011, and then the town took it up and then had a number of committees, proposals. One of them that Gus sat on, one of them I think a lot of people in town sat on, Roz sat on one, Bill sat on one, and then there was but there was no action. There was no people coming together, consensus on what the building should be used for. So all the ideas that I know the community still throws out on Facebook and everything else. Let's make it a Quincy market, a marketplace, or let's have affordable housing. All of those were reviewed and discussed and vetted in some way at that time. And there were reasons that the town chose not to move forward with that. The one thing that did seem to get a consensus was the community center. And this was during 2018 and 2019. There was a committee that was formed. They went out and did a public poll. And they felt that they came up with a proposal and a budget that would turn the building into a usable asset for the community, that would not even just be a community center, but would be an economic driver for the town. And so that's when the community center proposal was pushed forward. The Board of Selectmen, the only way to pay for this because of the budget would be to take it to referendum. And so the Board of Selectmen, it was added to the capital plan and targeted for referendum. 2020, obviously, a lot of things got postponed along with the school plan because there was two things that were discussed at that time, was bonding referendums. And the town, at that point, the Board of Selectmen said, we've got to put a pause on any of our bonding referendums until we see where we're going with COVID. So that kind of got shelved for 2020. In the meantime, the town was doing a lot of work about space needs and came up with a concept of putting some municipal departments into the building. Because one of the biggest criticisms that I heard throughout this whole process, it's a massive building, it's going to sit there empty and no one's going to use it. So, well, let's use some of that space for a department that needed space that was identified through our facilities assessment, and try to save some money by not having to build them more space on their current building. So that was part of the thinking behind adding youth and family services into the building. And then Beach and Rec has an office there, obviously, because they're going to be managing a lot of the programming in the building. So that was all kind of revised and updated with the new budget, and then the Board of Selectmen voted to send it, unanimously voted, to send it to referendum on February 15th, 2022 referendum, with a budget of 15.9 million. And so that budget was voted on. Voter turnout was 36%, which is kind of right in line with what most standalone referendums have done. Actually, it might even be higher than other standalone referendums. And the project passed 55% yes, 45% no. So it passed with a good margin. Next slide. So that's just a little history, just to remind people, and the more detailed background is in some of the presentations that were done in 2022. Recent history is we were very excited because we were awarded the Urban Action Grant by the state of Connecticut to offset the cost of the project to the town. We also applied for later a federal grant that, and we were very excited to receive that. We learned about that in March of last year. And then we had a lot of conversations over the last year about the budget, and we knew that the budget was tight and that we were going to have limitations. And the building committee and the Board of Selectmen talked quite a bit. Do we skinny down the project and value engineer it and take away some of the enhancements that people wanted with the project, or do we just go out to bid and see where we're going to land with the project that people envisioned at the referendum? And the decision was to move forward with the vision and see where that would come out when we went up to bid. And that's where we ended up. This was all discussed in more detail at our December meeting. So today we're not digging into the project and budget details. But unfortunately, the bid, we had an estimate in October that said we were going to be $2.5 million short before the bids were submitted, or the bid package was sent out. And when we got the bids back, we got estimates in the range from 5 to 7.5 million. So that's why we are here today, because clearly that was far higher than any of our professional estimators had said in terms of the project budget. Moving on to the next slide, just want to highlight a little bit why. This has been talked about in multiple meetings over the last 6 months, but I just want to summarize quickly. Number one, every year that building has been shut, the water was turned off very quickly and no heat in it, it has deteriorated. And so over time, the deterioration has continued to escalate. We've also hit a extraordinary amount of inflation since literally the beginning of 2022. The budget was set in 2021. We went out to referendum with a budget. That graph just shows what has happened to construction costs since then. So that is an uncontrollable factor. We may not like to hear that, but we all know what inflation has done to our lives over the last 2 years, and the construction market has seen it supercharged. Depending on the components, raw material prices, it's settling down a little bit. But once prices go up, they don't come back down. Okay, there might be a few things that we might see come back down and settle down, but a lot of things don't just come back down once pricing has gone up. The design plan I want to highlight, because I think there's been a little bit of conversation about this. What went out to bid was what was voted on. There has not been very much change at all. There has not been mission creep. There's not been all this extra space for other activities. There's not some grandiose theater in it. What went out to bid, what was pretty much was voted on at referendum. And if you get into the project details, you will see that. Floor plans are very similar. The frontage design for the entrance to the building and the amenities are pretty much what was discussed 2 years ago. But what they found after we had some funding to go in and actually look into the building and take down walls and do a further investigation and have experts and engineers go in and look at the building, all happened after the referendum, that there were a lot of mechanical systems that could not be reutilized or upgraded. They had to be entirely replaced. The septic was identified as a bigger problem they anticipated. So now a whole new septic system, but it wasn't just a new septic system. It had to be moved to an entirely different location, which required an extensive amount of site work. So these are all things that there's a lot more information that our advisors can provide on these drivers, but the highlights, there were things that weren't accounted for in the original budget. They thought they could rehab, upgrade, refine, and instead they've had to do a full replacement on a lot of things. And that is really what has driven a lot of this budget issue. So that is what page 6 is. So page 7, and this is where I think, I don't know for the boards, because this is all background leading up to now. Why, we've all know this, we've heard all this. Page 7 is just, I think developed in order to just put in writing so people understand. There's been a lot of questions out there about the project. And we cancel the project. We petition to vote it down in a town meeting. Who decides going forward what happens with this? So I consulted with our advisors and basically after their review and their opinions were that the town meeting is not a vehicle to stop a referendum. Once something is voted at referendum, you can't just have a town meeting to cancel it because the public has voted on it. And so that is not a mechanism that can kind of unwind a project because people decided they don't like it anymore. The Board of Selectmen does have control though over the scope of the project and whether or not they feel that given the budget they have and the situation at hand, can they deliver what they think is a reasonable meeting the objectives of the referendum. And so that is a decision of the Board of Selectmen to take. But it's also, problematic in the sense that people have voted on it and want this community center and have earmarked money for it. So that is a difficult decision that we would have to look through and talk about. And that's something we're going to go through in a few minutes in terms of what those options are. But I did want to just clarify once again that, whatever in terms of town meetings or, that's not going to be able to nullify something that was voted on by the public or referendum. So I wanted to highlight that. And I don't know if Matt or Carrie, if you wanted to, weigh in further on that, but I think this slide pretty much summarizes, the discussions that we've had.
I think it was an excellent background presentation. And I think as far as the options for undoing a referendum, a bonding referendum, I'm going to defer to Attorney Ritter because, the implications are significant.
That's correct.
Yeah, Peggy, I think it was well said. Oh boy. Am I here?
Yep.
Peggy, can you hear me? Yeah.
Can't see you on our screen for some reason. I don't know what. I'll look at this here. But go ahead, we can hear you.
Okay, sorry about that. Yeah, your summary was good. I'd also put out in the charter, it's interesting. The only way you get to referendum through a petitioning process is if it's rejected. Then it can be a negative action shall be subject to reconsideration by referendum. So the charter is very clear that there's not a path from a direct petition to referendum without that intervening negative action. And as I pointed out when we talked about it, if you were the petitioners and you wanted to cancel the project and you won at town meeting, there would be no referendum. So the only way you actually get to referendum is to lose at town meeting, which is sort of a weird outcome and not one that I think would allow you to overturn an existing referendum. The other issue you get is latches. The town has relied on this referendum since February of 2022 to go ahead and begin the project, borrow money to that extent. And so to come in 3 years later, 2.5 years later, and say we want to stop it, I think there would be arguments outside of the charter and statutes, just legal arguments about reliance and latches that the town would rely on in that case. And there's good case law on that and how courts look at bonding referendums and have to understand that communities need certainty that once the referendum is adopted and they move forward, 7 years later, someone can't pull the plug with a petition or a new Board of Selectmen could come and just stop it. Once it gets going, it gets going.
So Matt, not to put you on the spot, but there are a number of people in the room. Can you explain to them the legal ramifications of trying to pull back once bonds have been issued, which is the situation in this case?
Yeah, it would be very unusual. As you said, you would have the reality that the town could have legal exposure from the advocates who want the project. But when we have bond proceeds, we expect them to be spent, right? These are tax exempt bond proceeds. We expect them to be spent for a project. We have a timeline by which we have to spend them, or else we have to be careful about arbitrage issues. So the long and short of it is, once the referendum was passed and a couple of years went by, at this point we have pretty good reliance that we have to move forward with the project, and the charter doesn't allow you to do it another way. We'll certainly take questions to the Board of Selectmen. We're always open to different interpretations, but again, there's very steady case law across the country about reliance and how important that is, particularly in the bond world where you have federal tax laws and the tax code and rules and regulations promulgated by the IRS that are at play. It would be very dangerous to begin to start, if any community, not just Madison, could just start and stop in the middle of it based upon petitions or who was in office, things like that. Referendums have staying power.
And Matt, you would agree with me, even based on Madison's charter, that the Madison charter calls out when you go out for a referendum for bonding, it kicks you into the requirements of the general statutes. In other words, Madison's charter doesn't provide for a different methodology when it comes to bonding for these types of projects than what is required by the general statutes. Isn't that correct?
That's correct, Carrie. Yep.
Okay.
It's actually just one sentence. It's one of the shortest charter provisions related to bonding that I've ever seen.
Okay, great. And I don't know, board members on this particular topic, I mean, as we go through the options, that might be a better time for questions, but do you have any specific questions on this? Should we move forward?
Well, just one, Attorney Ritter used a term of art that I didn't understand. He talked about latches.
Yeah.
Yeah, a better word might be reliance, right? In other words, things have gone on too long to try to come back and overturn it or challenge it, right? At some point, the town has, again, we've sold bonds, gone out to bid, it has a project. And so a court would probably, I think, make the argument that, and it's not even really relevant because the charter doesn't allow you to do it anyway. But let's say the charter did. I think there's a secondary argument, which is a court would say, it's 2025. The train is well along the tracks, and it would be very detrimental for a variety of reasons for the town to be told somehow it had to stop. But that would really be a secondary argument. The primary argument is the language of the town charter, which is very clear on its face.
Okay, great. Well, thank you for clarifying some of that, but I hope that just helps people understand a little bit more when we talk about what our options are going to be. And so if we go to the next slide, I just tried to provide a summary of what, kind of what the different options are, right? And we talked a little bit about this at the last meeting. Obviously, the first thing that this board actually talked about in the spring was, we want to build the vision that people have, right? And so, and that's what they took out to bid. And unfortunately, that price tag has gone up quite a bit. So do we ask the people to allow us to spend more money on the project? And because we have these grants associated with it, can we allow us to use the grant money versus additional bonding to pay for that increase in the project budget? So if the two items, option one and option two, really are referendum driven, they're saying, we have to go out to the people in order to get permission to do that. And there's two different timelines we can follow. One is we can follow and have a referendum soon. The bid package that we received in December expires March 20th. So in order to keep those prices locked in, we would have to go out and get permission and get the budget secured by the voters of the public so that we can then sign contract with their bidders. And so that expires March 20th. So we would have to have that vote prior to March 20th. And so I set up a timeline we'll talk about later. Doesn't mean we're going in that direction, but just illustratively, if we did a March 18th referendum, and then, it would basically mean if it passed on March 18th, right, then we could go the next day, award the big contract, and they could start pretty much in May with the project. And then we talked about a 1-year construction period, so it would open sometime in 2026. So that would be the timeline. If it got approved, we got the additional funding secured, and we can move forward because we have the bid package, we have the pricing, we have the contractor that we would be using. So what does that mean for the budget? Obviously, the bonding budget, the idea would be we would be getting permission to use the grant money only and not increase the bonding. The bonding budget would still stay at what was approved at 15.9 million. And then there would be some costs associated with having a standalone referendum, which we know always exists, right? So I put in a number of around $8,000. It could be 6 or 10. Just it used to be 6 is what we assumed, but it's gotten a little more expensive now. So we would have a standalone referendum. The second option would be, and I know there's been a lot of talk in the community. Well, why are we having a standalone referendum? It's is it optimal for people to vote outside of normal referendum times, right? Where a budget referendum is May 6th. So what if we were to put it on the May 6th budget referendum? which is the most recent upcoming vote that's happening in town. Now, unfortunately, that means we would lose our bids. The bids, it will expire on May 20th. So we would basically lose any guaranteed pricing for the project. But in talking to town, our construction manager and town staff and a bit with Colliers too, the one thing that would allow us to do is we could still go out, we would pick a number and get approval. We would go out to bid again after the project is voted on. Now we would have a new, bigger budget. And it does create more certainty to the construction market because now you have the budget fixed. And we would repackage the project. When we went out to bid in the fall, because the budget was so uncertain, we had like a base project and then we had 11 alternates. It was very complicated. I'm not a construction person, I'm not an expert, but my understanding is that's a messy way to go out to bid. We had to do it that way because we were looking for a menu of options to fit our budget. Unfortunately, none of the menu of options fit our budget, but we were hoping we'd have our base business and we could pull a few other things off the menu to tie into the project. Unfortunately, that didn't happen. So what we would do is pick the project, we'd have one package, we would clean things up, and we'd go out, and then we'd get voted on, you know, if the additional funding got approved on May 6th, we would then rebid the project the next time. That would delay the project a little bit. So we would award bids probably later in the summer, and then construction would begin in the fall. It also creates more uncertainty, and we'll talk about the pros and cons of these, but basically the bonding budget still would not be impacted because it would be the same philosophy. We would be asking to spend the grants on the new budget and not increase the bonding. The third is then just saying, we got $15.9 million, folks, okay? So you got to design a building to that budget. This was talked about extensively in previous meetings last year. You lose a lot by trying to stick with that budget. And I think that there was a feeling we really wanted to deliver the vision. But the option is we just skinny down this whole thing and say, this is the amount of money we have to spend and this is what you're going to get. So they would have to go back. They'd probably have to redesign the front of the building, which is one of the more expensive elements of this. It would have a very different entranceway. We probably couldn't do anything to the lower level, you know, so there would have to be a lot of modifications made, but we could come up with a building that is renovated and that does have community space in it. And that would keep it within the $15.9 million project scope. Obviously, that's going to involve redesign time. And we then rebid it towards the end of this year. And then if everything works out, then we would start construction at the beginning of 2026. And then the final option is more if we felt as a board we couldn't deliver a project with the bond funds. And that was what I think Matt was referring to earlier, that you could abandon the project because we can't really deliver something that we think is a community center with the budget that we have. And that would be a conversation that our board would have to have, and we would still have to spend money to shore up the building. It's just, there's some core investment that needs to be required immediately to protect it. And then we would have to have a public conversation about what we would do with that building again, which has been going on for 20 years, right? So that's gonna, it cause us to spend more money still for asset protection. And then, but it does mean that we're not bonding any more money for the project. And then obviously the grants would be lost. We would not be able to use the $7.625 million because there wouldn't be a community center that we would be funding. So those are kind of the summary of the 4 different options that we laid out. And then I go into the next slide is just really kind of trying to weigh the pros and cons of those. And I guess I'd really like to, I don't know if you want, how the board would like me to do this, or you want me to walk to the pros and cons, or how would you like me to?
No, I think we can
Yeah.
start discussing
Yeah.
this.
Okay.
Since I spoke, maybe. So, as we've gone through this process, and Scott and Al and I were all on board during the good old days of trying to figure out what to do with Academy, in a serious way. And I remember, from a blank sheet perspective, proposals were put in front of the community and we heard a lot of no's. A lot of no's. And that's when we regrouped and said, well, we're hearing what people don't like. We're not hearing any consensus about what people would like. And that led to the infamous survey that while it didn't necessarily have a clear, 99% this is what we want, there was consensus amongst the public at the time for a community center. I think it's important to note it wasn't for a $16 million community center. It was for a community center. That's what the public spoke out about. And then reinforced that as we went on with future meetings. And while I maybe wasn't one of the people who voted for a community center, I have taken it very seriously that in this seat, my role is to deliver on the community's vision for that building. That what I'm doing is put aside my personal opinions and bring to fruition what the townspeople asked for. And in that spirit of delivering on the vision, I look at the options up here and recognize them, but the only one that really delivers in anything that looks like a tax dollar efficient way is to increase the budget and use the grant money to pay for that extra amount. We would be honoring the $16 million in borrowing. I apologize. I know it's $15.9 million, but I'm thinking in a little bit rounded number here, so I'm going to call it 16 million. The community voted, and the voting community said $16 million is okay. This path doesn't alter that. How we got to being over the budget is less important to me than the fact that we just are, and now we have to solve this problem. I don't like reducing the scope because it doesn't honor what was originally asked for. I can't support just stabilizing the building because that is the worst form of kicking the can down the road that I can imagine. So, I think we do owe it to residents to follow through and provide a plan that works and fulfills the vision. There's a couple other options, I think, that haven't been getting a lot of play, but maybe should be worth discussing just so that, we know that we've covered all of our bases. We could, for instance, reduce the scope to 15.9 million and then go back and say we've got undesignated funds in our balance and apply those monies to that. The problem there is that some other project doesn't get done. Some other project that we've got on the books now has to suffer to do that. And in the long term, what looks like a savings, because these are tax monies we've already collected, become new taxes levied, because now we have to make those tax dollars up to complete the projects that are on the books. And so I don't think that's a particularly good way to go. Cutting the project short of 15.9 and then putting the remaining work into the annual operating budget will be the most painful way to proceed as a taxpayer. Because now we're not taking this expense and spreading it out over 20 years. We're taking the expense and spreading it out over 1 or 2 or 3 years. And we're already facing some pretty steep increases in our budgets from the other projects that we've approved. And I don't know that Madison taxpayers have the capacity to carry that extra burden on an annualized basis. So I bring it up as not a good idea, but an idea that I think should be on the table for us to talk about.
And I agree with that, Bruce, because when we took this to referendum originally, and it was 15.9, that was for the project at that amount of money. It was not adding additional components of the project into a CIP plan. So I think whichever direction we go on this, it should not include items to be completed at a later date. This, whatever way we go,
Scope is the scope.
the scope is the scope. This is the dollar amount. You vote for it with, the community's input, yes, no, whatever way it may be, but without adding additional components of this project into CIP, because I think that would be disingenuous to the process.
And I think that's what we've asked the building committee to come back. I think is it next week?
I
To come
think it's
back with
next
sort of what their recommendation looks like to the Board of Selectmen. But I 100% agree with you. I think to me, the scope is the scope. I think we need to be super clear with the public and with the vendors that we asked to bid on this, and our town employees that, may be, experiencing time in that building. So I agree with you completely. I reflect on the four options here and I think, where my head's at is either option one or option two. I mean, to me, the community, and I think very well said, Bruce, has a voice, has had a voice and should have a voice in this process, as defined by our charter. And I think right now, there are some variables at play relative to the current bid package, as well as I think, I don't want to say this too loud, but I actually do listen to you, Bruce. And I tend to agree with you on the May timeline, because of the folks that, may not be around, the snowbirds. But also it may allow us to tighten up the bid, from a scope standpoint and really put out a definitive scope. So I tend to like the May 6th version. It then would incorporate, what the building committee is going to suggest to us. We then may fine tune it accordingly. But I think there's some interesting things that could happen. Now, the flip side of that, and probably you're seeing some of that in terms of cons, is we lose the current bids. So there's risk with going with a May 6th. The public probably has more of a voice. We might have a tighter, scope, but there's risk that those bids could come back higher.
But at the same time, we could get more bidders because we do have a more refined scope, so we could get more pricing options.
That's right.
Well, certainly it would give, there was a bidder that made a mistake and had to withdraw. But we haven't talked about this here. We could also go back to the successful bidders or the ones who successfully submitted and say, here's our new timeline. Will you hold this? Will you extend this?
Yeah.
The worst they can do is say no.
Is it commonplace? Probably no, but
But
You
that doesn't
never
mean-
know.
It doesn't mean they wouldn't do it.
The answer's
Or do
always
it
no,
under
yeah.
some
Yeah.
conditions. I do think it's also worth pointing out that every single option in front of us involves a vote.
yeah,
A
public vote.
a public vote. And so
not
really,
voted by this body. but-
really what we're talking about is what's the most transparent way to have that vote? Transparent, for lack of a better word. So, yeah, I've said from the start, I really like the budget referendum. It's a natural voting point for residents. I will concede that we got more in this bonding vote, more turnout in this bonding vote than we do at many budget referendums.
What's our
I don't think May is
Outside of budget referendum is 14%.
But I do think, every year we've got two natural voting points, November and May, and that we, should really be working hard to make sure that the only time we ask the voters to come to the ballots is those two dates.
I hate when you're right.
Yeah, I'm gonna, yeah. I think this side of the table is in remarkable agreement here. Peggy's second slide reminded me of why so many people believe that this project would enhance our community. They may not agree with every single reason, but I think for many folks, there are a number of reasons why this project seems to appeal to a lot of people. based on the information we've gotten over the last month or two, it's clear the price has gone up, the price of the project has gone up, but the cost to the public has not. And I think, well, that's hardly good news. To me, it softens the blow a bit. Bruce is absolutely right. We need to let the voters decide one way or another, whichever one of these processes we decide to pursue. I think I'm ready to go to referendum once all the information the public needs is assembled. And whether that can be done by March 18th or whether May 6th is a function of just how quickly all of the appropriate information can be made available to the public. So I would favor moving this to either one or two. Let's hear from the public.
Well, I think I appreciate all the thoughtfulness. This is obviously something, a heavy burden we've all carried for a long time, right? And it's been a lightning rod sometimes, but it's also been exciting to see the public really embraced the community center space. I was reading an article in Time Magazine today, and it was just perfect timing because I was reading it literally at 5 o'clock today. And it was talking about, you know, how society has changed so much and how the need for community spaces is so critical today with so many people having mental health issues and connecting with others. And it talked specifically about the need to have spaces where people come together, not where you're working, not where you're like, you know, sitting in Starbucks with your laptops getting together, but where you socialize and you don't work and it's not your family. And it was a really interesting article because I feel like that is what this vision is, right? It is bringing people together, whether it's to do pottery, to play basketball, to have kids play pool in the teen room, or to sit there and have a dance class. It's a hangout space for the town of Madison that is going to enhance everybody's lives, whether you're a young person or a senior. And it is something that I feel is going to add so much value to our town and help our downtown in terms of economic development. So I have to step back, and I think we forgot a lot of that, you know, and the excitement and the vision and the purpose of this as we get wound into the numbers. So it's important to step back and reflect on that. And I think we have to get that messaging back out there now more than ever. And we voted on this coming out of COVID. And I think people then, it was fresh in their minds how awful it was not to be together and not to hang out together and not to socialize together. And that's why this passed. We just got to remember that because it's needed more than ever today. So I would really want to make sure this gets built. And so I'm glad that we have the support. So let's get the budget that can make it happen, right? Let's let the people decide to spend the money on the project to make it happen with what the community envisioned for. So we can do that with these two options. I will say, I did put together quickly on the next page, if we were to go for the March 18th referendum, it's tight. As much as I'd love to just lock and load and say, guys, this is what you're bidding on, this is the price, or this is what you're voting on, this is the price. It's a tight, this has to go through, the process to referendum has to go through the Board of Selectmen, Board of Finance. We have to have a special town meeting. It's not a voting town meeting, but there's different timelines that we're required to follow. And, you know, we want to get a lot of information out to the public. We did 2 public information sessions last time, but I want to do a minimum of that. And I'd rather have more time to remind people of what this project is about. So I'm leaning towards the other timeline as well, which surprises me because I think I was very much like, I want to get this done. I want to lock it in. But as I step back, it's a lot's at stake. And I think the messaging is important. I think the building committee wants to make sure that they're making the appropriate recommendations. So they might want to have some more time on this. So, you know, today is not the day to decide either of this. I think what we have kind of decided, it sounds like we feel referendum is the right next step. And so with that, maybe we come back at our next meeting next week. I'll have a more detailed schedule of what May 6th 6th
Mhm.
would. And then we'll hear from the public questions, and we'll try to answer those questions, and then we can kind of, we'll have to pull the trigger on the March 18th pretty soon, if we're gonna do the March 18th. But I'm hearing that there tends to be a lean towards the
Mhm.
May 6th. So it gives us a little breathing space.
On May.
Couple of,
No.
a thought and a question as you were talking. So one, just data point, I think, in our surrounding towns, Madison currently is the only town without a community center. I think that's a fair point. So I want to put that out there. But two, is Matt, and Carrie still on the line?
Yep, they're still with us.
So-
I think, I'm assuming they are.
So Matt, if I think this is for you, if I could ask you a question.
Yeah.
If we send this to hey, there he is. If we send, this is Scott Murphy, if we send this to referendum and the referendum fails, does that then nullify the original 15.9 or 16 as Bruce puts it? Or are we back to the original, what was approved by the public? I just want to sort of bottom that out.
Yeah, the referendum, the original approval would not be, doesn't get nullified. It just means that you don't have the authorization to spend more money beyond the 16 million to round up, right? And to be clear, someone made a really good point, and I couldn't see who it was. I'm sorry, in the council. Our advice is pretty consistent. Go back to the voters, right? So those who feel like we're going to petition and didn't like, well, I don't like the fact that my petition can't undo the referendum. You can't get more money without a referendum. And under your charter, you have special appropriation authority. We've said the same thing. You have a locked-in referendum. You got to go back to the voters. And so it's very consistent either way you look at it. I just wanted that was a very good point that one of the Board of Selectmen members made earlier.
Well, and also you've talked about in the past, this is not uncommon, given the construction market.
No, it's
We've
not.
seen other towns have to go back and ask for permission to spend more, correct?
Yeah, especially the last couple of years, a lot of clients have gone out. They thought they had the max they needed, and lo and behold, they were off by 10, 20%. It is not uncommon. Yep.
I can't find the reference now, so I apologize. There had been some discussion of about a state statute that empowers boards of finance to cancel a project in the event that it's impossible. So there was a document referring back to a state statute that unfortunately didn't define impossible. I think left it up to our imagination. But are you familiar with that? Is that a real thing?
I'm not familiar with it. Doesn't mean someone can't send it to us and we'll look at it or carry. But let me also say this. Forget the state statute for a second. You have it as we pointed out, the Board of Selectmen, the project could ultimately be canceled by the Board of Selectmen. If you went to all these referendums and they kept failing, and you found that you could not build the community center, it just wasn't possible or feasible, then we would probably tell you to take the existing bond proceeds. You would put them in an escrow account that's yield restricted, and we tell you to use it for existing debt service. And that's to comply with federal tax rules. So I don't know about this impossibility statute. It may exist, but the Board of Selectmen has that authority now. If ultimately you can't get there, you go back to the voters and they keep saying no, and you throw up your hands and go, there's no way to build this project without more money, then you may be faced with impossibility. And then you'd want to make sure you follow the federal tax code, so you didn't want to follow that. Projects do get abandoned, right? That does happen. But I think for you right now, you'd have to decide whether you could reduce the scope of the project to meet the current budget, or if you get more money from the voters to apply the grant the other way, if you could then build it for that amount of money.
And I want you to know that we did discuss with Peggy doing whatever investigations, excuse me, I'm choking, are feasible between now and the referendum so that we can limit the scope of any additional surprises. I'm sorry, I'm losing my voice. So we can limit the scope of any additional surprises so that when you do go out to referendum, you really feel like you've got the hardest numbers you could possibly have. You know, investigations as to what, if any, other asbestos or issues are facing the project. I'm sorry.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, and that's something we can talk about with our construction team too. If there's other things that would just solidify that bid package even more, another kind of analysis or knocking down another wall or whatever it is they do when they try to kind of zero in on what the cost would be, for a renovation. So.
And I think Matt would also confirm that once a project is approved, I think you have to do more than just throw up your hands. You have to at least try to see it through. I don't think it's enough to just tonight say, forget it. We can't afford it. But I defer to Matt.
Yeah, I think there's power to referendum, right? It's a very direct way of doing it, and your charter reflects that, the statutes reflect that, and case law reflects that. And then you add on the layer of the fact that you've borrowed money to begin some of the work on the project, and now you're in a whole, I think, in a whole different space than you may have been a year and a half ago. Yeah.
Okay. So, all right, well, thank you for that. And I think we're good for now, Matt and Carrie. Appreciate you coming on tonight to answer questions. And I think our board will probably be tapping you again, I think, as we nail down, further referendum steps. But I think we're good for now.
Well, thank you
Thanks, everybody. Have a nice night.
Yeah.
Um, And then I think really for us, we have a meeting Tuesday morning, that's our next meeting. So we would be talking about, we're going to be hearing back from the Academy Committee, right? I don't think we're going to be voting on anything next week. We'll hear back from the committee. We're resolving in terms of, they've had some time to now analyze the bid packages more and really dig into it. But we would look to make some sort of decision on the timeline in the next 2 to 3 weeks, I think. We have to really nail it down, right? So that would require us to kind of nail down what timeline we're going to be working towards. Okay?
And do we have now in our new budget timeline, the adequate room for absentee ballots?
Yes, and that was, that's in the March 18th one that I put in there, but we would put that in for the, if we did May 6th too. So we'll come up with the same thing for May 6th too. But yeah, we would allow for absentee ballots. I think the plan would be, we would send out the postcard like we did for the one in 2022, notifying people that a referendum was pending, And we do, if we do May 6th, it does give us a little bit more time to get some articles out. I think we have a reporter here, we might have an opportunity to do some more public information sessions and just get some good information out there so the public can make an informed decision when they go to vote. Okay?
Yeah.
Okay, well, good. So I guess with that, then, the next item on the agenda is citizens' comments. I know we have a lot of people here, so I just want to highlight again that today is just, we will listen to your comments. We ask you to be respectful and limit them to 2 minutes. And I'm going to ask Bruce to be our timekeeper. We'll go around, let everybody make their comment. You're also welcome to submit things in writing through the BOS at madisonct.org and any specific questions. I would highly recommend submitting them via email, and then we'll try to respond to everybody's questions and post it on the website in a reasonable amount of time. I'll try to get everybody's questions answered. So with that, I guess we can start with in the room. We'll start with the in the room. Please raise your hand. You need to state your name and address, and then you can make your comment for the record. So starting over here, we'll start on this side of the room. Go ahead, Roz.
So I just want to say thank you for.
Name and address.
I'm
Sorry,
sorry,
yeah.
Roz Kim on 31 Island Avenue. That our slogan when we went to referendum was live well, Madison. So playing to the social need and response that we got. Secondly, with your timeline, and Peggy, you brought this up, that the 2026 opening would coincide with our town's 200th anniversary. So there's sort of some nice fanfare that would come along with this. I would also like to just recall from our design committee 2 possibilities that we haven't gone down. One is to create a development fund so people can donate to the community center. So beyond the funding that we're getting from the federal and state level, that we could create an opportunity for people to donate money. And second is that as we look at some of these amenities, the gym, the theater, the kitchen, we might look for some public-private partnerships that would also bring some additional funding to offset some of these other expenses.
Thank you. Anybody else in this part of the room? No? Moving towards the center here.
Can I just do it? So my signal when you get to 30 seconds is I'm gonna do this. So you know you're on the short end of it.
Okay, great. So yes, please state your name and address.
Jim Schmaltz, Jonathan's Landing. So a couple of questions you could follow up and with it was on the bonding. I believe there's only temporary bondings. They're 1-year bonds that we just renewed again. It wasn't the 20-year construction bonds. You had option 4, which showed a cancellation of the project, but you didn't explain how that would have happened if based on what the bonding council was just explaining. If, it was $100 million, error that we were off, there's of course got to be a way to do that. So it's where's people's thing. I think doing it and having the absolute accurate number this time is important. And I lost my last point. But those were, I think, having that clarification on the bonding, where that actually is, if we're only in a 1-year temporary bond, we're going to end up, that's going to expire and need to be paid off. So then you're just not taking the full bond.
Okay, great, thank you. Any other questions? Yes, we'll, here, well, it's still in the middle, so we'll.
Hi, Andy Valambroso, Horse Pond Road. I think you mentioned a couple times in the presentation that you are following the scope of the 2022 referendum. And in that scope was, number 1, geothermal. Is that now out? So you're actually not following scope. Okay. Number 2 is it called for complete abatement of all toxic materials in the building. I hear from a lot of people in town that that is a big concern of everybody. It was around 800 and something thousand to do the abatement back then. Probably figuring it's like 1.2, 1.3 now. Encapsulating the paint and only doing a partial building is going to cause all kinds of problems down the road. Technically, it is doable in a commercial building if kids aren't there for 8 hours. But if somebody whacks into a casing or something else, that debris is there, okay? I just think it should be a clean building. Definitely should be a clean building. Paying, I just heard today that $1.2 million is gonna be paid for theater lighting. On top of all the rest of the stuff in this theater. It seems like this community center is built around this theater. And I don't think it's right. Okay, I think every aspect of that community center should be equally divided for everybody's need in town, not just the theater. There's really gonna be nothing generated income from the theater. It's very minor. I think Clinton gets $100 every time a troupe or somebody performs there. So I think that the investment of this theater, especially with the non-access with elevators to equipment up to the 2nd floor, really defeats the purpose of a theater. I think we got a theater in town. I'd love to see the community center, but I think it's a big cost to the town and the taxpayer. And it's just not following the original referendum. And online, I call it a bait and switch because, people thought it was going to be one thing and it's now another thing. My time is up.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I got one more quick question.
Yeah.
Is the lyric stage moving in there?
Yeah. We're on answer
You're going to
questions,
respond to
so
me. Oh, you're good.
So, moving on.
Garrett Visconti, Wildcat Road. So I'm guessing Peggy picked 4 options to choose from. I don't know why there's only 4 options that Peggy picks that everyone has to choose from. I didn't see what your attorney recommended, that you, as the board of selectmen, can cancel the whole project. If you can't do it, you think you didn't do it, you put a good faith effort into doing it, which for 4 years, it seems like you did. So nobody's talking about that. I think Peggy should have put that option up there if she picked those options. I'm surprised that the board of selectmen didn't say what I'm saying right now.
Okay, for your comment. There was something else.
Teresa McDonald, Ellsbury. You were saying that a lot of towns have community centers. Well, Guilford's community center is one, yes, but Guilford does not have a senior center. We have a very good senior center that is not probably used to the capacity that it could be used. It has a commercial kitchen. It's a state-of-the-art building. It just had a brand new floor and wall in the dining room. I don't know why. It's a relatively new building. So it, not necessarily thinking that all the shore towns have community centers. Like I said, Guilford does not have a state-of-the-art senior center. That's number one. Number two, I'd like to know the definition of the theater. I want to know, what do you mean by the theater? Are we talking where people come in and you're going to have events? And if you're going to have events, what's the capacity of the theater? So I need to know the definition of the theater.
Okay, thank you. Any, keep moving this way, where we're going to first comments only now. Yes, please, in the back. Yeah.
Hi, it's Pete Thomas, Devonshire Lane. Couple of things. One is, this is a problem that we've had for a long time, guys. I think we want to come to a good conclusion. I want to commend you guys because you have the ad hoc committee going on facilities management. I think one of the most important things we have to do right now when we come to this project is see where the redundancies are. You're talking about a gym, we got a gym. Well, maybe we downplay the gym over here and look at other purposes for that gym if we're going to upgrade this gym. I think what we want to do is be more efficient so that whatever programming we decide to put in there becomes beneficial. If we have space at Polson, let's use the information that you're putting together with David's committee and put it into the project so we come up with a better solution. Finally, when the attorney was on, he mentioned that we had an issue if we had to refund bonding. We should look to see if there's call provisions in the bonds, to see if there's rate modification provisions in the bonds when we issue long-term bonds. It's been done in other municipalities. It's something we should have. Nobody's saying we're going to go back to 3% rates. But if we do, we should have the ability to do it without a big legal suit, if you don't mind.
Okay, thank you.
Tom Meehan, 6 Cosmo Circle. What I wanted to address was the fact that everything we said about the charter, it came down to it that the Board of Selectmen, our representatives, have the option to cancel the project altogether and use the bonds or reassess the money for other projects, which, as a person who raised 4 kids in this town in the last 30 years, our schools and our seniors are our most important asset to us, period. And yet we have a beautiful new senior center right across the yard from where we're projecting this. We have a brand new school going in, and we haven't seen anything really clear cut about how much this is going to cost the taxpayers for the long haul, for the next 10 years, 20 years, how much more money per year we have to spend in tax dollars to keep it up. And if it's only temporary for fixing, having a clean building, that's long-term cost. And I just think the long-term cost might not outweigh having already a brand new senior center, a new school going in, a beautiful new library, and places that aren't used at all close to what it's redundant. And by the way, we're coming into a point in time where we just went through, it was approved right after COVID. We were all stressed. There's a lot coming up over the next couple of years that says our town might need to be a little more frugal and prepared. And if our legal people say we can use that bond money for other things, our selectmen, our representatives should truly look at it carefully and maybe say, let's be a little more proactive to it. That's all.
Dennis Crowe, 141 Twilight Drive. I've read the explanatory text that's identified with the referendum official statement, and that, to me, is your contract with the people as far as what it is. Here's what we're going to give you to approve $15.9 million. And then I hear tonight talk about changing scope. I expect that when you say changing scope, you're only talking about going to the referendum and saying, we're going to offer you something less, but we're going to keep it down to the number you asked, but we still have to go through referendum. It's my perspective on that, because otherwise you're non-compliant with the contract, which we have with that vote. And I also want to just point out that you indicated that we're between 5 and 7.6 million. I presume that your delta between those two is based upon what you think could be reduced because of the alternate slash ads that were listed in the bid package, or the presentation by Colliers. But those are all within the scope. So you could possibly reduce it from the 7.6, but I think you're talking about somewhere more in the range of 7 to 7.6. And then the final point that I'd like to make is that when we talk about these changes and scope and costs, we've talked so far, you folks have talked so far, and with Colliers and everybody else and so on, about the cost of construction and motorcycling. So sorry, I had it on mute. But we have not, we haven't identified whether the other costs, professional fees, legal fees, everything else, if that has gone up and what's spent. And I do want to make, I'm sorry, I said final point. There was one last one. I noticed in the December 17th meeting, I saw that there was discussion about maybe moving some of the scope off to other town funds and so on, such as paving the parking lots. It's an absolute no-no. The scope is the scope for the project, and that project money is locked in, and it's not something you say, well, we'll push that off to the town budget.
Okay, thank you for your comment. We have 2 hands raised in the back, and then I'll go to online.
Bruce Jocelyn, Brookwood Terrace. I'm going to be very short. I'm saddened to hear tonight about my dear friend Gus. We've been buddies for years and years. And I might point out that Gus pointed out to me many years ago that our senior center is actually a community center because the town of Madison refused to take certain federal and state funding that it would have designated as being exclusively for the use of seniors. As such, our senior center is open to all the residents of Madison without any restrictions.
We'll take one more in the back, and I'll put the hand raised, and then we were gonna go online, and then I'll come back to the room again, so. Okay, why don't we go online? We'll take a couple comments there, and then we'll go back.
Terry's-
Okay, well, that's
Just new.
Hi, Terry, Barton Pride, Terry Denninger, Barton Pride. A lot of this talk is about a community center, but from what I understand from what is the current design, I don't really see it as a community center. What I understand it to be is that the 15.9 million would actually entail renovating the building to the position of allowing offices for Madison Youth and Family Services and Beach and Rec, and everything else wouldn't be flashed. So if we're talking about a community center, we don't have that. We don't have that in the design. It is a municipal building, a municipal government office building as it currently stands. So that's something I think, the community center we have is right now, which could be used, is our senior center. Again, nobody's really addressed the annual operating cost of a 50,000 square foot building. If it were to be built, even to the tune of 15.9 million, what's the annual operating cost? Even if it's only 1/3 open, as the current design would be, just 1/3 open. So we're looking at when the new elementary school opens, the town is going to receive Jefferson and Ryerson. And if you then take Madison and Youth and Family Services and put them into a 50,000 square foot building, then you have their building you have to deal with too. Those are 3 buildings that then come to the town responsibility that you have to think long-term about. How are we going to be spending money? The budget is going to be astronomical. So, because of all the redundancies that we currently have in town that's already been pointed out, the gym, the theaters that we have, the senior center that we have, all the facilities we currently have, please reconsider Academy. Sell it to a developer that you all in planning and zoning can have an input on and turn it into something that we currently don't have and that won't burden us, the public, in debt for decades to come.
We'll go to some of the hands raised online. And then, to make sure everybody has an opportunity to speak. Go ahead, Janet.
Am I unmuted?
You are.
Hi, you are.
Hi, guys. I don't know why it's showing my picture and not my actual face. Um, anyway, so I have a few comments and a question. So first thing is, a couple of you made the statement that the taxpayers won't be paying more because they'll be using the grants to offset the overage over the 15.9. I feel like that's a bit disingenuous and it's a spin because the taxpayer nut is supposed to be reduced by the amount of the grant. So if you're taking the grants to reduce our nut, we're only paying around 8 million. We're only ending up paying around 8 million. That might be a lot more palatable. And that's how it was presented to us in the referendum, that the grants would be used to deduct from that 15.9. So the spin that the taxpayers really aren't paying more is not true. And I hope that you don't present it that way when you do present those options. Second thing is, the attorney said we've gone so far into this that we really have to proceed because, you know, we've put a lot into it. Well, we could look at it another way. We can say because it's been so long, things have changed. We've got a lot more resources now in town that we didn't have then. The library is robust with programs and classes and things, and so is the senior center. So things have really changed in these 3 years. So do you owe it to the public of Madison to now say to us, here are the real costs and here are all the facilities we have in town. Do you still want this thing? Really consider that option. I hope that you do. And the last thing is, you know, we voted for something that was really in people's imagination. Costs were not right. A lot of things were left out. We didn't know exactly what the community center was going to be. We still don't know. A theater was not recommended by the design team, yet it's in the plan. And from all the meetings I've listened to, the theater is really not feasible. It's not workable as a theater. It's a gymatorium. And you know, some of these things really should be looked at to remove from this thing so that we can get closer to the actual budget. And then my question is, if one or two don't pass referendum, do we go to option 3 automatically? But do we go to option 3 without adding any more money at a later date? So nothing from the CIP and nothing from the undesignated funds. Do we just say to the building committee, you've got 15.9, make it work for 15.9 and see what we can do?
Thanks, Janet. That's time.
Very good. Thank you.
Yeah.
Next hand. Joe Mako. Okay, Joe, just name and address for the record, please.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yep.
Joe Mako, 22 Randy Drive, Madison, Connecticut. I have 2 questions. You had 4 options up there. Will all 4 options be put before the public? I hope you do put that up there so we all have a choice. The other thing is, I looked at the numbers. 80% of the taxpayers did not vote for this project. It was 45 to 55, and only 36% of those taxpayers. So if you use the math, you come out with 80% of the people in this town that pay taxes did not vote for it. So where's this mandate? Thank you.
Next hand, John Rasmus.
Yes, good evening. John Rasmus, 4 Governor's Way. Janet kind of stole my thunder, but I guess I'll just follow up with, from what I heard from Attorney Ritter, it's not impossible to put a halt to this project. And I guess I would just say, you know, it has been a couple of years, but I think that could be argued that we were making a good faith effort to try to build this community center for $15.9 million. And it's impossible at that price. And to do it the way that it was sold at referendum will cost more than $15.9 million. Does that meet the definition of impossible? It took a few years to get the design and numbers in, constitute a good faith effort. I think those are things that should be explored with council.
Thank you for your comment.
Thank you.
Another hand raised.
Andrea Mastaloni.
Yes, hello, can you hear me?
Yep.
Andrea Mastaloni, 36 Concord Drive, Madison, Connecticut. So I have a few things to say, and I'm going to be honest, this has become one of those things that, like, I am so tired of. Are you there?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
What's happening? All right. So I really think this town needs to take a break. We have a beautiful, gorgeous town with a lot of buildings not being used. And taxpayers don't know what this is going to cost them, as we all know. And so let's stop saying that. It's getting really irritating. To piggyback what Terry said, we should not be building and abandoning buildings. And the people up on the stage giggling about this and saying that we as taxpayers and people who live here are stupid, it feels really wrong. I read a comment recently that was so interesting to me, and the person who posted it said, why were all those schools not able to be rebuilt and made back to normal? But this building needs to be, but we had to abandon all those schools and go to this building. We have so many resources. We have the most beautiful, oh my God, football stadium. We have everything here. This has to stop.
30 seconds. Okay, go ahead.
I'm done. That's it. I'll stop there.
You can keep going.
Okay.
You got 20 more seconds.
Thank you very much.
I just think we need a break.
Okay. Happy Marino. Okay, thank you. State your name and address for the record, please.
Hi, this is Happy Marino, 119 Island Avenue. I know a couple people have said that we don't know the operating costs. I would respectfully request that the operating costs, the last one I saw were from 2019. I'm sure things have changed since then as well. So I would request that they are fully published prior to the referendum so that it actually is transparent and people know exactly what it is that they're voting for. I do think that we've known for some time that this is going to be more expensive than the initial referendum, and that the delta was not published prior to the last budget vote. So if we can get as much information out there as possible so that people have a full picture, I think that would be very beneficial to the taxpayer. And then my second request is if the attorney could just, or somebody could just post the section of the charter that applies to the referendum. I was reading through the charter as he was talking and I couldn't figure out where he was seeing that. So just for my own edification, it would be helpful. You don't have to, but it would be helpful. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Lisa D.
Hi, everybody.
Lisa,
Sorry, I'm.
your name and address, please.
Oh, sorry, 22 Franks Way. I'm going to echo what John Rasmus said, and that the lawyer was, what he said was well taken, that this project can be halted. I'm speaking to you as a founder of a nonprofit whose volunteers add up, and on any given day to 20, 25, 30 volunteers. We've never had a problem getting a meeting space, thanks to Austin at the senior center, thanks to our library. Beyond that, my kids went to academy. It's emotional for us, but let the old gal die a restful peace. She served her time. We can do so much with that property for young kids. in my mind, I'm thinking skating pond or sledding hill or vegetable garden, whatever it is. She's served her purpose. If something like this project is so controversial and has everyone at each other's throats through the real Madison, the real Madison, and the real Madison. So Dennis, Dennis Crow, your point was well taken also. No way should any funds dedicated to this project be filtered out into other projects. That's not fair. Thank you, everyone.
Next.
Next one, Matt Gordon.
Yep.
Hi, everyone. Matt Gordon, 34 Lenore Drive. I think a lot was said on the options, and I definitely agree with that. And I just want to go back to Happy Marino's comment and launch from that, and that's on the operating costs. That's what really concerns me, in addition to the acquisition costs, the construction costs. If we do move forward with options 1 or 2 and the expanded space for Madison Youth and Family Services, I just want to put it on the record that that would be the revenue source from the clinic visits coming from them. And so if we do move forward, I would implore the Board of Selectmen to set expectations for Madison Youth and Family Services for their clinical services for billing as they go forward to help offset some of these operating costs. Thank you.
Okay, great, thank you. So we can return back to the room for any additional comments here in the back of the room for speakers, please.
Okay, I think I'll stand up so I can face the audience. Bill Stableford, Fort Hampshire Road. I've been involved with this project for many years. I was chair of the Academy Design Committee back in 2019 and chair of the most recent committee that recommended and conducted a survey to which 2,000 people responded. It generated a great deal of enthusiasm and excitement about potentials for this building. This survey is online, madisonct.org, under Academy Committees. So our advisory committee, based on the survey covered all the demographics, all the age demographics of the town. The first priorities were for arts and entertainment, culture for performing arts, studio arts, pottery. Community space was very big. I'm also on the Board of Trustees of the Scranton Library. There is in fact a great need for more space. The demands for the request for use of the library rooms exceed what the library is able to provide. People especially want working space where they can leave home and use the study rooms. That was very large in the results of the community survey. Sports and recreation. In terms of the theater, the gym, these are all revenue generating facilities in the potential building. So this can more than adequately meet the needs of the community, and it can go a long way to paying for itself. I know that the Beach and Rec Department now, as well as Madison Youth and Services, they all charge fees for the use of the facility and for activities, so there will be a continued revenue stream.
Thanks, Bill.
Thank you. Yeah, I know.
Thank you. Any other first hands? Yes, please.
So, my name is Betsy Meehan and I live on Todd's Mill Circle. I really liked all of your comments tonight. I am opposed to the project, but what I liked was, Bruce, what you said was that we're trying to honor the people that voted for this community center. I don't think the community center was really itemized well enough so that people knew exactly what the community center was going to entail. But I also know that I'm just wondering with Attorney Ritter, If we were to say, see how many people voted for that, how much of the population of Madison voted for that, and if you were to have a revote, what that would really mean. I don't know, what the laws are about having a revote on the community center, but I think that the point of having a new school and having the senior center and the library and the closing of Jeffrey and the closing of Ryerson, which, people talk about, nostalgia. I went to Ryerson and she was my principal. So I just feel like 15, 16 million plus the more, I just don't think we need it right now. And I would wonder if we took a vote today, what the majority of Madison would say.
Okay, thank you for your comments. Just want to make sure, so we'll allow everybody to speak first. Anybody else, hands raised, and then we'll go to second comments for a few minutes. So I think Jim was
Yeah, Jim was
actually
first, yeah.
for a while, so.
That's fine. You were looking for the clause that was in the Board of Finance regulations on page 25 for that. You say we have 2 federal bonds, but we haven't, or 2 bonds that we've received, but we don't have paperwork on the federal bond, which means it's not in there completely. And also the regulations that's required may increase that by $1 million+. So if you could clarify that for us, it was part of the Build American program. In the referendum proposals and things when you were talking, one of them was next steps once the referendum was approved. And I would like to see if you could follow up on that. It was putting together and finding out what was going to happen with the existing Madison Youth and Family Building. So I'm assuming we don't have a plan for that, so it'll be another building that's left open. And then also programs and revenue potentials. So if Bill could provide us with library, how much we're charging for revenue, and if we're actually, and opposed to the cost, how much it's offsetting the cost for the revenue that's coming in. And then my last point is, if Madison Youth and Families in there, I was reading through the bid specs, and I don't believe I was able to find anything about HIPAA compliance, which because they do billing, their internet access control, all of that needs to comply with federal HIPAA standards. Segregated networks, access points have to be locked into enclosures, etc. So we want to verify that.
Sign, thanks.
Okay, thank you.
Andy Valambroso, Marshpond Road. I think you can tell by the comments tonight that citizens aren't really happy that have chimed in about this whole program. I've acquired, and the reason why I'm going into this because the attorney addressed it, about the petition. I have about 500, a little more, maybe a tiny bit less. And I know I heard rumor that you guys were gonna fail it anyways, so I didn't submit it yet. But that's like 500 people in town that do not want this. Okay, that we know of. A lot of people are afraid to say anything. They don't want it, but they're afraid to put their name out there because of retribution. I don't think that's a really good thing to have, especially the businesses in town. They're worried about retribution if they sign the petition or come forward and not wanting it. And another point is, when you guys came back to the citizens about more money for a new school being built, I think it was like a couple years ago, I don't know, it was $1 million or $3 million or whatever. It got voted down, overwhelmingly got voted down. I guess you took the money out of another piggy bank you had. And I remember the superintendent of the school saying that it was cheaper to build new than to rebuild something. Okay, my family's in the building business for 8 years. Then why are you doing academy school if it's cheaper to build new?
Thank you.
Comment.
Sorry, we had a first speaker. I'm trying to get the people who haven't spoken yet, we'll have them speak.
Paul Kessinger, 285 Legend Hill Road. I've been sitting here listening to people who are generally objecting to the whole process, the building, a lot of questions. Why haven't there been more people here talking in favor of it?
Absolutely.
Because we went to meetings, we studied, we read letters to the editor, we read articles, we thought about it, and we voted for the vision of the community center. And we're still out there, we still believe in it. I think I, for one, am a little surprised to hear at this late date all this objection. And I congratulate the Board of Selectmen for keeping to their job in deciding the only thing that needs to be decided here is how do we deal with the fact that the costs that we voted for, clearly voted for those years ago, be dealt with. And I think that the attorneys did a great job too in bond counsel in explaining, look, the people have voted. The 15.9 will be spent. The horse is out of the barn. And those 55% of us who voted for it, glad, and we look forward to the day when Peggy cuts that ribbon.
Tommy and 6 Cosmo Circle. And I just want to reemphasize that you talked about the referendum going till March. From March and extending to May. I can't emphasize enough, the original referendum was so poorly voted on by population. Let's do everything in our power to make sure everybody who's back can get a chance. And I really hope that part of that is mentioning, which was a great aspect, that brand new beautiful senior center is open for more public use as per se a community center. And when we say what we voted on then, that small amount that got to show up, give them a chance for more people to vote. And since that referendum was done, there's been unbelievable amounts of poor management, communication, and mishandling of the entire project. It is not the same project it was when we voted. And there's been so many mistakes as to why it's not going forward and why we're upset. And again, it's a matter of making smart decisions, listening to the people, get the vote later so more people will be home, and make a conscientious effort to know that there is more options there and it's not just about what we can do. There's a lot of money that needs to be spent on other things in this town. We can squash it and spend that money. There's huge amounts of important projects that are kind of going to be pushed to the side, kicked down the road. Let's not do that.
Okay, thank you. Yes, Cindy.
Okay.
Okay, I just go on.
My question is, how do seniors find out about this going on if they don't use the computer? Where is it written, or your information, if they don't use? Because I'm a senior, and I've talked to some of the seniors at the senior center, and a lot of them were befuddled. They didn't even know, they know the academy building is around, but they didn't quite know the status of it or the projection of a community center because they don't use the computer. So where is this written, or how can they become abreast of what's happening since they don't use a computer? And secondly, on the academy building, if it goes into nutrition and it gets going, I hope the whole building gets renovated and it becomes fully handicap accessible.
Okay,
So
thank
don't
you.
just do some part of the building and leave the other half hanging.
Thank you for your comment.
It's me again. Just to reiterate, it looks like about 80 to 90% of people in this room don't agree with it, maybe 50 people. About 15% of people voted for this 4 years ago or 3 years ago for that price, that price we can't do now. And that last option, like I said in the beginning, I really hope the Board of Selectmen looks into what your attorney said, that you can cancel it. I hope you make Peggy put that as an option up there too, for the people to vote on as an option if we get to that, not just those 4 options.
Thank you for your comment. So any other comments? Katie, so, okay, we have a hand raised, yep. Katie, state your name and address, please.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yep.
Hi, this is Katie Stein, 84 Bartlett Drive. I will be very transparent and say I did not initially vote for this project way back when, but I just want to commend the Board of Selectmen for making the very hard decision, given all of the hullabaloo that seems to happen on social media, and recognize that it is a difficult decision, but to respect the 35% of voters who took the time on a cold February to come out and vote. We don't get that kind of a turnout for most budget referendums. So as difficult as this decision is and the decisions that you have going forward, I'm appreciative of the work and relieved to know that the people that did vote for this project will have their vote respected moving forward. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So I think, okay, Terry, yeah. Go ahead, Terry.
Just to kind of boomerang off Katie, Terry, Bartlett Drive. Like to respect all the people here, including the Board of Selectmen who came out on a very, very cold January night to say that we don't think this should go forward, not as is. And I honestly, I really love the historic context of that building. I think it has great promise. I don't believe this is the proper use for it as a municipal building. It's not going to be a community center as we have in the current design. So please allow the people to speak again. As Janet McLean said, so much has changed. So much has changed since 2019. We have to acknowledge that. And there's nothing to say that we can't do different. There's no reason to put good money after bad. Thank you, and thank you for everyone in the committees who have done extraordinary amounts of work. It's not go unacknowledged.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. And I think that's a great way to adjourn the meeting. I do want to thank, because a lot of this is a lot of heavy lifting by a lot of volunteers over the last 20 years, including our most recent building committee, and we have some members here. They've worked very diligently with a lot of passion and care, and so has the advisory committee for Academy, and they can't control the construction market. So, but I know that they've had to work very hard, and unfortunately bear the burden of some of the negative press on this, so to speak. But this is really something, we're doing this because we love our town. And you know, we all might have different visions of our town, but we care about where we live, and we're all friends and neighbors. So let's just try to remember that. This is going to be an ongoing conversation over the next couple of months. We might disagree about this project, but we are all friends and neighbors, and we all love Madison, and we're grateful that we get to live here. So thank you for coming out. We want the public to participate, and that's why the board is looking to do something that allows the public to make the decision. So with that, I will say, motion to adjourn. All right, all in favor. Thank you very much, guys.